From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights podcast.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, March 2nd. You're listening to a special State of the Union edition of the HPS podcast. This is Tony Fratto with Hamilton Place Strategies. I have two of our terrific managing directors with us today, Kriston McIntosh and Jonathan Graffeo. Guys, welcome. Really glad you could join for the podcast this morning after a late night last night, watching a State of the Union address. I had a later night than you guys. I think I had to do a CNBC Europe hit at 1:10 a.m.
So you just stayed up all night, Tony.
Yeah, not working on too much sleep right now. But look, just a couple observations. One is, just a March State of the Union address, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, but State of the Union address used to be back in January. They used to be January events, and they just keep getting pushed out. I mean, at this rate, it won't be long before we're, putting it off until summer.
It'll be a year-end report, perhaps, or something.
Exactly. Yeah, the mid-year check-in.
Yeah.
Of the union.
Yeah.
It was a spirited speech, I thought, by Biden. He came in with a lot of energy. He looked good. This was the first time that in 2 years now that they've been maskless on the floor. So it looked pretty normal. You saw a lot of outpouring of support for Ukraine, with people wearing blue and yellow, the colors of the Ukrainian flag, or ribbons. And so he chose to put that at the top of the speech, which I think everyone expected. In fact, what everyone was longing for. I think that it's been a long time since we had real unity on the House floor for a State of the Union address. And I think most of the people came into that room were looking for the opportunity to cheer. So I think he was spirited. Maybe a little too spirited. I thought when he ran pretty quickly through the top of that speech on the Russia-Ukraine parts, where I just felt like the words were all great. The message was terrific. He had something to talk about in terms of the rebuilding of the transatlantic alliance. It felt, for someone my age, felt very normal to see a president there talking about the partnership with Europe and fighting a common foe, and one foe in particular, Russia. So for a Gen Xer like me, that felt very comfortable. But I think he could have milked the crowd, milked it a little bit for some of the longer applause lines and really let people show their support. And he kind of blew through those moments a little bit. But it was it had all the elements of a standard State of the Union address, but not really grand plans or new programs. Kriston, what did you think?
I really liked President Biden's energy last night. I really thought he was strong in a lot of his delivery throughout the evening. I think he did a great job trying to reassure the American people in a very comforting way. He really kind of reestablished and reset, I think, the essence of the Biden presidency and what we've come to know of Joe Biden with his decades in public service. I thought he was empathetic. I thought he had a great connection with the middle class. And it was a good reminder of his strength, and I think the administration's strength on a number of different fronts. And I think he did a great job of trying to communicate to a number of audiences, everyone from Vladimir Putin himself, to the EU and the world stage, to people back in Scranton, PA, and Pittsburgh, and every place in between. And so kind of that explainer in chief was really necessary last night. And I thought he did a good job walking through the rationale, the motivation for our continued engagement and the escalation overseas, and also some of the domestic priorities too. So I really enjoyed watching it, and it genuinely held my attention for the duration of the evening.
Yeah, Jonathan?
Yeah, I thought he hit the mark with rose to the expectations. Expectations are such a tricky thing with the State of the Union. Administrations are always trying to tamp down the expectations. And then, I thought Biden's delivery was pretty good. I thought he came through well. The things that struck me is kind of the back and forth with the game that he played with corporations, where it was like patting them on the back with one hand and then smacking them upside the head with the other. Whether it was patting them on the back with Intel or the car manufacturers with electric vehicles, and then smacking them upside the head with, the usual claims of tax evasion.
Populist pieces. Populist pieces on antitrust and price. Essentially calling, price gouging on it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know if people heard a lot that was going to comfort them on inflation. I saw David Axelrod say, it felt kind of like a drive-by last night, and he was questioning whether it was effective or not. But I mean, Tony, you know this well. Inflation, once it gets out of, once it starts to become rampant, there's only so much you can do policy-wise to rein it back in. So curious what you thought on how he handled inflation.
I agree. Look, I think Kriston's point on on Biden's ability to connect on with feeling on the things that he's talking about is it's pretty unique that way. It is one of his strengths. So even when he's talking about Russia and Ukraine and the mission there, he does it from in a very personal personal way. His words you can tell they mean something to him. Yeah. The domestic programs that he talks about, he has a lot of meaning and feeling to it, and you can tell that it's those things are personal for him. It's just that's a quality, that's the everyman quality that he has, and it comes through when he speaks. But they're flailing on inflation. Inflation is just really hard because there are no easy answers on inflation. The few things that he can talk about to do something about inflation, they don't really ring true. And I'll just say this, put my economist hat on and say, these aren't things that are, the corporations aren't causing inflation, and it's not, it was just by chance just this morning as I was, up early running through things and found a paper by the Bank of England that happened to just come out this morning about, shipping rates.
Yep.
So I'm the guy. That guy's up at early morning reading papers on shipping rates. But it was timely because the president mentioned it last night of the going after this notion that the shipping companies are concentrated and that's why your shipping costs are going up. Well, we've had three major shipping companies for a very, very long time. And, it's not obvious why at this moment they should decide to collude and raise prices. And of course, the paper I happened to read last night, didn't show that either. So it's tough for them on inflation. It's hard for him to show his emotion on inflation because then it begs the question, well, what are you going to do about it? And it's largely a question for the Fed and Jay Powell, and not much that the president can do about it, except for, could take away the tariffs that are still out there. That would do something very quickly, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I thought there's only so much you can do on fiscal policy, and it was interesting that he tried to essentially say that the way that you combat inflation is to lower costs, and, oh, by the way, you do that through passing Build Back Better and all these policy prescriptions. So he tried to thread that needle. I don't know if you watched Governor Reynolds' response to it, but she popped that pretty good, I thought, where, I think the average person looks at inflation and looks at government spending, and it's like you've already spent trillions and trillions over the last couple of years, and the answer to inflation is more spending. I think that probably strikes most people as odd.
Yeah, whether it's and of course he has tax increases in there also, so that's where he says it's paid for and balanced and won't add to inflation. But you're right that the Republicans have an easy message on inflation, and they don't have to get into details about it. It's like the kinds of things that the way they talk about it tend to sort of ring true. Kriston, I want to ask you about the president's domestic agenda.
Yeah.
And, I didn't expect, I don't know if you did, but I didn't really expect anything, any new program. We hadn't gotten hints in the days leading up to the speech that there might be some, big new initiative from the administration. And so and because they have so much, left undone, just within, Build Back Better, they've got accomplishments to talk about, which I think he did to effect, talking about the, job creation and the American Recovery Act, shortening the impact from COVID. So I thought he was able to do that, but wasn't looking for new big programs. But I thought that he may present some kind of message or a strategy to both the Democratic caucus and the American people to take some elements of Build Back Better and try to push them through. And we didn't see that either. He did talk about each of the elements of Build Back Better, but we didn't see a real rhetorical push of how to get them done, because the math hasn't changed yet in the Senate.
Sure. So I think there were two things. One, I really appreciated his emphasis on Buy American. I thought that was great. It was a nice unifying force. I believe they were USA Chance. And I thought he did a good job of humanizing it. He had I believe it was the United Steelworkers Union representative from Pennsylvania. Yeah. He had the Intel CEO talking about the 10,000 jobs coming right outside of Columbus, Ohio. And tying that back to the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, where so much funding has been invested in. There will soon be, shovels breaking ground, ideally, in the months ahead on a number of these projects. So I do think that is a great way to speak to some of the fiscal policy and to provide hope. And ideally, it would be a unifying policy agenda. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to build that out in the year ahead. So I do think that is part of the economic agenda, the Buy American, and I thought he did a great job of really highlighting that and using that. In terms of the Build Back Better, there was definitely lots of discussion, certainly about some of the components of it, particularly with the care agenda, child care, talked about healthcare costs. So I think it was a great signal that he still believes in these. They haven't been abandoned, but I think it was strategic that he chose not to frame it exclusively under Build Back Better and just talk about the policies themselves, because I think that was part of the challenge. The packages were large, and I think in some of the political debates, it was easy to lose track of the different components, many of which poll very highly. There's a lot of strong public support at some of these programs across the aisle. And when it was wrapped into this political intrigue of, Build Back Better, who's with it, who's against it, a lot of the substance and the meat of those programs was lost. So I thought in some ways by him just naming them, child care, health care, and elder care, and all of these things that are important and resonate with so many Americans, I actually thought that was really smart and enjoyed that. And it spoke to, I think, his base, and again, was a great signal that he's still committed to those. And obviously voting rights, it was great that he mentioned that too. That's been a huge issue, concerns about voter suppression, particularly as we are engaging overseas and defending freedom and defending democracy. I think it was an important signal to a lot of folks back home that, he's still committed to trying to eradicate any efforts to suppress voters here in the U.S. as well, even if that legislation hasn't been able to move through Congress successfully yet. So I thought with the domestic agenda, he certainly referenced a number of things. I think what I suspect was probably extraordinarily stressful for the White House speech writing team, and having to add in, probably the last week or two, a whole section on Ukraine. He probably wasn't able to spend as much time on some of the other domestic policy priorities as he might have, initially planned to. But I think that's just the realities of the job. I kind
of wondered about that a little bit. Yeah, look, I mean, having been in the White House for a few State of the Union addresses, they're, it's tough to keep them tight and focused, either thematically or even or compositionally. It's just like really, really tough because you have a steady parade of, every agency, department secretary coming at you with a reason why the president just needs to mention this one thing. Members of Congress, he just mentioned this one thing in the speech. Can the president just mention this other thing? It's going to show that it's important. How could he say it's important if he doesn't mention the State of the Union address? So they kind of become Frankenstein monsters. And to Kriston, to your point, for speechwriters, we've known speechwriters across different administrations, and they love the challenge of a State of the Union address, but man, boy, it's just really hard to make them satisfying because there's just too much packed in there. It's hard to keep it focused. I thought there was a little bit of that this year too, because they had to top it with the Russia-Ukraine stuff, which was exactly the right thing to do and appropriate. It wasn't particularly long, though. I worked for President Bush. His speeches were always, he'd never had a State of the Union that exceeded an hour. They were all 55 minutes or shorter, and some, because one, I think, was a 35-minute State of the Union address. So he was always kind of speedy that way. Clinton's were longer. Obama's were longer. Trump's were something had. I think Clinton and Trump had by far the longest State of the Union addresses. I think of the 7 longest State of the Unions, they hold all 7 spots. Obama was pretty efficient. Bush was very efficient. I thought Biden was pretty efficient yesterday. He didn't keep us too long. You get to like an hour and 20 minutes. It's a little too much.
It's just too much.
I heard 62 minutes was what I clocked in at. That's
what it was.
Yeah.
It's very reasonable.
It was just enough. Yeah. It left me wanting maybe a little bit more, but I wasn't ready, hoping it would wind down soon. I think it was just enough content. I think it was the right amount of time. And it was nice too seeing him afterwards spend so much time working the crowd and talking to the members of Congress. And we haven't seen those images in a year or two. So that was nice to see too.
Yeah, it's kind of, just in terms of, how long it's been, it was almost exactly 2 years ago, today's March 2nd, March 3rd of 2020 was Super Tuesday. And that was the day that Jay Powell surprised everyone with an intermeeting rate cut, surprise rate cut. And to me, in a lot of ways, kind of kicked off the significant COVID response efforts. And by that time, March 3rd, we were starting, masks, lockdowns were yet to come. The size of what would be COVID response. It's almost breathtaking to think about. Started with Graff, you were there, right? I mean, it's like started with a bill of like $8.5 billion. It soon went to 1.2 billion and then became 2.4 billion like overnight, right? It just double the numbers. And
I remember the first funding request from the administration was literally like $1.5 billion.
Yep.
And then quickly,
and then everybody said,
yep.
Yeah, and there was not a whole lot of math analysis on this. They just said that's not big enough. Double it, and it doubled overnight. They just everyone agreed to double it, and it was really, really amazing. But that was 2 years ago. And it's been a long 2 years. And to Kriston's point, we had not seen, maskless people doing a normal thing on television. So it was good to see that. There was a lot of a lot of what was familiar to us who've been watching these things that we saw last night, I thought.
Yeah. One thing that struck me, I thought Biden did a pretty good job in acknowledging and being honest about people just being exhausted out there from the last couple of years and through COVID and economic hardship, those types of things, but without coming across too much Jimmy Carter-ish and, being too down. In other words, I thought he did a pretty good job in balancing the tone there. And, he ended it by saying the state of our union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. I thought that was pretty clever. That was a good way to thread the needle there. Because it has been. People are exhausted over the last couple of years, but you have to show hope too.
Yeah, he said those words. I think he said you're tired, you're exhausted, you're frustrated, and just tired of the malaise. And it was great. I think he preempted what they may have been anticipating critiques of discussing. In the response, I think the governor was talking about masks and kids and schools being closed and work and whatnot. And I feel like the Biden team kind of was anticipating that. And he was able to get out ahead of that in his remarks with, I want kids in schools and downtown should be full again and vibrant again and people should be at work. So I think they were trying to head off some of that critique.
And Governor Reynolds, actually, I think you're right, because she came out of the gate and the first thing she did was try and paint the current situation like it was in the late 70s and the early 80s with inflation on the rise, the Soviets, Soviet aggression, and crime throughout the country.
Yeah.
So she tried to put him in that Jimmy Carter box. And of course they anticipated that at the White House and tried to find a way out of that.
And the fund police as well. Yeah. And the fund police, they were ready for that. And so it was bold. It got the bipartisan support. And he was able to do it in a way that I think was authentic to the Democratic Party. Even here at HPS, we've worked on some of these community violence intervention. We've had clients in the nonprofit sector who've been focused on those issues in the past. And so the administration has been supporting that and committed funds to that over a year ago. So it wasn't necessarily, a flip-flop or a strong reversal with the defund the police argument, and people certainly have different opinions on that. But I thought Biden, did a good job of threading that needle, and he can point to the administration's work on engaging local communities and policing and the support that they've had for that for over a year.
Yeah, I thought that was a good moment for him. I thought you mentioned earlier, infrastructure, Kriston. I think one of the better lines of the speech was, we used to talk about infrastructure week, and now we're talking about an infrastructure decade. I thought that was an effective line.
It was.
I completely disagree with the Buy America policy, but that was effective for him. And I know it was effective not just in the room, but also on some of the dial test polling that was going on during the speech. We know it polls really, really well, and people liked it, however much I dislike it.
But Tony, if I may, I think what's good about the Buy America piece, though, is that with the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and that the great investment, it's not just empty words, as a lot of that so often has been over the last few decades. I think with both parties, it's been a
that's my fear.
But now,
Kriston, that's my concern. Is I wish it was just empty words. I think
it's coming.
It's literally, to me, it's like you're using an anti-inflation. Buy America for an anti-inflation message when it literally raises the cost of all the things that we're buying for infrastructure. It's the opposite. So anyway, we'll have a separate. We're going to do a separate podcast on debating Buy America. Yeah, we'll do that. But the speech itself, I thought he hit the marks. I thought it was he did what he needed to do on Russia, Ukraine. That was really important. That was a unity part. The populist pieces, he hit his marks on them. And I don't think, even though he ran through the things that really, really do appeal to Democrats and progressives on the domestic agenda, I didn't get a sense that it was really antagonistic in ways that kinds of things that poke Republicans in the eye. Yeah, and that's not really his style so much. So I thought it was a solid State of the Union address. It was there's not much to really poke at it. Except for, if you were looking for a grand strategy or a grand new program, those are the things you didn't get. But he's got a full agenda ahead of him for the next this year. And they're going to be, Jonathan, you mentioned the Republican response. I think we got the rhetorical playbook for Democrats last night. We saw the rhetorical playbook for Republicans last night, too, in the response. Yeah. The messaging is set, and now we're going to see over the coming year, what they can get done and how effective that they deliver that messaging as we head into midterms.
Yeah, a definite preview for the midterms with the messaging there. I think you're 100% right. That's we'll see how it plays out, but we know what both sides are going to be saying.
Yeah, great. Hey guys, thanks for getting up to do the post State of the Union show.
God, no problem. Sounds like you're the one that needs some sleep.
I know, Tony.
I'll get it eventually. We appreciate it. Thanks, guys. We'll have a terrific rest of the week.
All right.
You, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insights and follow us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.